Welcome to Autism ADHD TV with Holly. That's me, a neurodivergent therapist, mom, and passionate advocate for affirming approaches. Maybe you're a parent trying to support your neurodivergent child or teen, a therapist or educator wanting to learn more, or you're a neurodivergent person looking for strategies that truly honor who you are. Whatever brought you here, you're in the right place. We talk about the real stuff: emotional regulation, self-awareness, executive functioning, self-advocacy skills that build confidence, social connections that are authentic, and so much more. And hey, if you're looking for deeper learning, check the description notes below for information on my parent workshops and continuing education trainings for therapists. You're going to love it. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and give us a like so you never miss out. And if you find Autism ADHD TV helpful, please share it with someone, because together we can create more understanding about neurodiversity. Now let's get into it. Welcome, Dr. Casey Ehrlich, to the Autism ADHD podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here with you.
I am so excited that you joined me. And we're going to talk about some really cool things today, including PDA. So we're going to go over communication and boundaries and peace at home. But before we do that, I'm going to say your amazing bio. I know everyone knows you already, but Dr. Casey Ehrlich is a social scientist, parent coach, and educator, and the CEO, founder of At Peace Parents. Casey brings 15 years of work experience and expertise in social science methodology to help parents and therapists understand how to connect with and accommodate PDA autistic children. She is currently working on empirical research with the University of Michigan Medical School on PDA in children and teens. So I'm really excited to see your research when it comes out.
Me too.
It takes some time.
Yeah, I'm not the principal investigator. It's actually a tenured neuropsychologist with the medical school who is also a mother of a PDA child. So it's really exciting. And we have a whole team of researchers working on it. So we have multiple studies in the works. It's really cool.
That is really cool. I'm so glad to hear that, because this is part of it, right? We're talking about PDA, we're learning more about it. People need to know how to help these kids. This episode is yet another way we're going to do that today. So let's start out for those people who are not as familiar with pathological demand avoidance. And how would you describe that?
So the lens or definition that I use is it's a nervous system disability, and it is a neuroception, or the survival part of the brain's awareness of losses of autonomy and equality as life-threatening. So the definition itself, like for the purpose of the research we're doing, would be a survival drive for autonomy and equality that consistently overrides other survival instincts like toileting, safety, eating, hygiene, and sleep. So that's a pretty esoteric or like academic way of saying it, but like the way that we can think about it as parents or teachers or therapists is often we're looking at these kids through a sensory processing lens or a behavioral lens, and we're thinking that the root cause is one of those things, or a social communication lens or an executive functioning lens, when the root cause of challenging behavior but also trouble accessing basic needs is that continual perception of threat from losses of autonomy and equality. This can look a range of ways. Like I've worked with families whose, as they were reflecting on infancy and babydom of their PDA children, they actually recognized this survival drive for autonomy overriding a need like sleep or eating, like mothers who would try more and more to feed the infant no matter how hungry the infant got, not just with breastfeeding, but with formula, they would not eat, right? And it was like often we explore through all these medical, are they colicky? Do they have allergies? And often these are the parents where like nothing worked and they realize, oh, it was the perception of me trying to make the infant eat that was activating the threat response and causing the avoidance and refusal. Or we get to some of the more extreme in the moment examples where we set a boundary as a parent, don't get near the road, or don't get near the fire, or don't get near the water. And the perception that there's been a loss of autonomy will actually drive the child to fixate on going towards what their survival instincts in a typical brain would drive them away from. So one anecdote I like to use to explain this with my own son, and I'm using an extreme example to illustrate the root cause and the mechanism. But when right before burnout, he went on, and before we had any awareness that he was neurodivergent, and I didn't even know the word neurodivergent, was I pregnant or had I just had my second son? I forgot which, but my husband went to take him to this camping trip with friends, and was he was doing s'mores, and my son kept trying to get near the fire to be closer to see what was going on. And at first it was like, oh, Cooper, be careful. But the more he would put subtle limits down, my son would actually run towards the fire. And it ended up where they were having to physically restrain him because the more they said no, the more he was trying to get in the fire. And it's like a very confusing thing because you're like, wait, where does the survival drive for safety kick in here? But what's happening is that survival drive for autonomy is overriding it. And where we see this, unfortunately, is often in burnout with that accumulation over time, where over time, the child or teen is continually experiencing the perception of threat, having nervous system activation in their body, and it builds to the point where it starts to disable them from accessing sleeping through the night, sleeping without their parents in the room, moving into a non 24-hour sleep cycle, what looks like a toileting regression, like a 7, 8, 9 year old having to wear diapers again. So this is why I consider it a disability. And I think we're going to get to some of this, but this is often one of the first places I encourage parents to look, to link, like not just the behavior, but how are their basic needs doing? And are you seeing patterns where they're having trouble accessing these things they need to live?
And I really appreciate you describing it that way because I think the title, PDA, really leans toward this behavior.
Yeah.
It has a lot to do with I'm asking you to do something, but the response is not what I would expect. And I think when you understand the neurology of it, where this isn't a choice, right? When you think of behavior, a lot of times you think of this child is making a choice. They've weighed the pros and cons. Nobody makes a choice to ignore basic things like food, right? Typically, when we think of a threat, we think of that fire you get away from or the oncoming traffic that you would get away from. But here we have you telling me has now created the opposite impact in how your brain just overrides the basic safety. That's scary.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I think in subtle ways, our kids are often telling us that this isn't behavior, like, Mama, my legs don't work, or Mama, I want to eat, but I can't, or I'm trying, but my body won't let me. But I think we often ignore those messages because we're like, what are you talking about? Yes, you can move your legs. There's nothing physically wrong with them. But there was a period of time during my son's burnout where we had to carry him everywhere because he would say his legs don't work.
It's not uncommon for us to see, kids in our practice, ones that we've been really working on self-awareness, they'll say, it feels like I can't move my body to do what my mom asked me to do. It's like
Yes.
freeze.
Yeah. And I think for so many of our kids and teens, even, they don't necessarily know why. It's a subconscious perception of threat, and it's pre-perceptual, right? Like it's the survival brain perceiving, am I in danger, am I safe, and then making the body respond with a nervous system reaction. So a lot of kids can't articulate why it's happening, but they're saying, I can't,
I can't
right?
move,
Yeah. Yeah, I
right?
can't eat. I can't eat it, mama, right?
We were talking about how we could easily look at this in a way that's not helpful. What would you say, in your experience, are the most common misconceptions?
The first misconception about PDA, honestly, is that it's rare. I don't think it's unusual or rare at all. I just think it's really misdiagnosed and misunderstood. The second is that the child will always be defiant, oppositional, or violent, or even avoiding, right? So sometimes avoidance is the nervous system response, and sometimes it's very different, like equalizing behavior, which looks very controlling of a safe person or sibling, right? Like correcting their words where they can sit, destroying their things, pouring out the spices while mom is cooking, which isn't avoidance. So if we're only looking at avoidance as the surface level of behavior, we're missing the full picture of what this actually is, which is a neurotype that's quite complex. There's internalized PDA. So a lot of these children aren't in the oppositional defiant disorder realm or severe ADHD, which are common diagnoses that bring people eventually into PDA, but like severe anxiety and very compliant and even very perfectionist students that hit a wall often when they're a little bit older, like tween teen, and all of a sudden they can't go to school, they can't leave their room, and it hits the parents like a brick wall because the parents of externalized PDAers see all the indicators all the time and they feel them because often the difficult behavior is directed towards the lead parent. I think a huge misconception, not just in PDA, but in the autism space, is that you can't mask autism. That's a sentence that so many of the families I work with and me as a mom have heard, right? Oh, he can't be autistic. He has friends, he's social, he makes eye contact and he talks, right? And how could he be fine at school and so different at home unless it's something you're doing wrong?
Oh, yes.
I think it ties into the broader misconceptions we have about autism. Another misconception I think is really important for parents to hear who are doubting their own goodness or their own child's goodness is the threat response and the behaviors that come with it are not who the child is. The child is not bad. And I remember as a mom having to make that leap of faith. And I've done a lot of trauma work around it, where I actually, at times, through the haze of postpartum depression and my own mental health struggles, saw him as a threat to me and a demon. Right? When I was in the throes of postpartum depression, like I've had to do a lot of EMDR and trauma processing around how my brain saw him, but he's 9 now and so sweet. Like he makes me coffee and he like brings me breakfast in bed, and he's just very different than what I saw on the surface, which was only his fight flight response. And so I encourage parents often who are new to this, or teachers or therapists, to think about a time when they had a nervous system reaction. Like I tell an anecdote when I was held up in the metro in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, with a friend. They were there were two men trying to steal our purses, and in response, like she started laughing hysterically and I started screaming and lashing out and swearing, and we had dinner afterwards. We were both shaking, like shaken
Sure.
up, yeah. And she was so upset that had been her response. She's like, I don't know why I laughed, like why did I do that? And I was like, Rachel, I don't know how I even screamed or swore, or what I said. Like, it just, both of us just did it. Like, our bodies just did it. And so I often think about that moment, because if someone heard the words I said or the aggression that I came with, and that the men ran away, thankfully, they would be like, oh, Casey's insane. But that
Yeah.
was a moment when my nervous system was perceiving threat and not a reflection of my heart or my rational brain when I'm in it.
I'm very sorry that happened.
Turned out okay. It was in
It
my
did, but
20s. Like,
that's extremely stressful. It's an excellent example. You don't have any control. You're not thinking about anything except I'm in danger.
yeah. So those are I think, the big misconceptions that I'm thinking of off the top of my head. I don't know if you have any that are coming to mind, Holly.
In my practice, things that I hear is refusing. They can, but they're choosing not to.
Yeah,
And it very much does look that way. As adults, we have these ideas that we grow up with that there's always a choice, and that's actually not true.
absolutely. Absolutely. I'm just sorry if this is a little tangent. I'm just reading this funny book my mom gave me and my other son, and it's called What Would Danny Do? And it's all about choosing, right?
Mm.
And how, in the moments where the kids have an upset time, which do you choose? And there's 9 different outcomes of the story. And I'm encouraging my younger son, because I can see he wants to. He knows which one he's supposed to choose, but he wants to explore what happens when he doesn't. But I read this book and I'm like, this is antithetical to everything I teach and believe about a lot of behavior that's challenging.
And some of us were parented this way too, that you punish a child
Yeah.
when they are not listening in the way you think they should be. And parents are really torn. And that's why so many people, so many therapists, parents, educators are really wanting to learn more about PDA because they see that the traditional ways of maybe dealing with oppositional behavior, whatever you want to call it, isn't really working. It's not working. And we want to know what can we do better. Thank you so much for going down those misconceptions. Our brains want to make sense out of what we see. And even if the first thought is, that's bad, that doesn't mean that's what you have to go with. So let's actually go right from that. That's a great way to lead into how do you help a parent feel peace? Because there's a lot of parenting stress there. Parents of neurodivergent kids are more likely to experience high levels of stress anyway.
Yeah, it's a big question. So for me, this ties back to a spiritual practice, which I came to because of my son's crisis. I was very much more agnostic atheist before he had his crisis, and I really didn't know where else to turn. So I was like reading Catholic priests and a rabbi and Quakerdom and Buddhism, and just combining the lessons I was learning. But one of the key things that started to support me was recognizing where I had control and where I did not, and then practicing accepting what I could not control. And I think so much of our freedom comes from clearly recognizing where you have agency and where you don't, right? And so often, as parents, myself included, and to no fault of our own, like, we're so focused on trying to change what we can't change, which is like, what tool or what strategy or what medication or what program or therapist can make this go away. And I spent years in that space of like, how do I get my kid to stop this? And the radical acceptance comes from realizing, like, if the root cause of what your child's perception of threat is a loss of autonomy or equality to you, then we have to radically accept our true choice that we have in any moment that we actually have, which is we're either always activating or accommodating the PDA child. So we can set boundaries, and I do set boundaries, but it's with the radical acceptance and knowledge that will activate my son's nervous system, instead of where I was for a long time of how can I set this boundary so that he doesn't have a nervous system response, and getting upset when he had the nervous system response. And that takes a lot of practice, and it requires really accepting, not in the like ether of, oh, I accept PDA, but all the trade-offs and costs and grief that comes with, if I continue with my very intense job in Washington, D.C., I can't accommodate what he actually needs to get out the door. And that doesn't mean I should quit my job. It just means I have to accept that choice point and that I can't change that. And I think most of us get stuck trying to change that choice rather than accepting the choice, and that can reallocate our energy to find more creativity and resourcefulness where we do have agency. Does that make sense? So in any given moment, it's like, how much are we pushing up against the thing we can't change, which is our child's brain wiring?
That's so important. We do get stuck, and easily this happens.
And
I've been
I get stuck
with
too.
my yeah, with my own kids. Even when you know the information, that doesn't mean
Totally.
it's easy. Moments where you just want them to do what you said.
Of
And
course.
when you were describing that radical acceptance, and I am absolutely behind radical acceptance.
Yeah.
100%. Because if we keep doing the same things that again don't work, and then we're surprised by the reaction and mad that they are having this response, how are we moving forward? We're really not. To me, it's almost picking your heart. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah.
You can pick this constant beating your head against a wall. They should do what you say, and then you're mad when they don't. Or I've got some grief here. I'm going to look at this as something I can't control. I cannot control how they perceive or how their body reacts to certain things. You can present things in a different way. You can collaborate. You can do a lot of things around that, but you truly cannot control everything. It's not possible.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's the paradox that, like, when we actually start radically accepting that we have that choice point, activating or accommodating, our energy starts to shift. And all of a sudden, we're not trying to control everything. We don't have as many expectations. We're not in the position of, I need to be the authority to fix this. And then they perceive a different level of felt safety and things start to change. But it's that first step. And this is why, like, in my program that I teach, we don't start with accommodations and strategies. We start with awareness and then acceptance. And we're actually working on the skills of the cost benefit decision making, like radically accepting what I just said. You're either activating or accommodating, and realizing where there are solutions that we have to move to decisions in our heads. So the energy shifts before we use all the accommodations and track how the child is improving their well-being, because we're moving into those skills with a true energy of offering, of using the accommodations to accommodate, not to make them different. And then the paradox is things start to transform because they perceive that you're not trying to change them or make them do things. You're there to support and witness and collaborate as a parent. And I know if I was listening to this 5 years ago, I'd be like, who is this nut job? What is she talking about? I like hate her, because I would have been so triggered. And if you're listening and that's you, like, it's okay. Shut off this podcast and just be like, Casey's not for me, and then come back in a couple years and you will be ready. I say that because 5 years ago, all I wanted on God's green earth was to make it stop, make the screaming stop, make him do the things, make him eat. Like, my whole life fell apart. Of course, I wanted to make things different. But in terms of truly shifting things on a sustainable long-term basis, this is the first step towards helping them spend more time in their thinking brain, creating new neural pathways to the frontal lobe instead of just always threat, and the trust. Because when you have all those three, things can really start to change through the relationship.
I think so too. When you start feeling, because again, I think everybody, it's a skill, right? You and I had talked about that before. This is not a response.
Yeah.
And I've been working in this field for 23 years. It's not always a natural response when you feel threatened, right? As a parent or a therapist or an educator, if someone is yelling at you or throwing things at you or whatever, you're going to have some kind of physiological reaction. And
Yeah.
that's where that skill, understanding, and knowledge really comes into play. What direction am I going to go into? Because they're not able to put those brakes on to be able to make a choice. They are responding physiologically to this threat, even though maybe you just ask what you think is a simple thing, pick up your shoes.
We're going to sit at the dinner table,
We're
or
going
turn
to,
off the screen, or we need to get to school, or put your seatbelt on. I totally get it. And
yeah, this idea in our heads where this shouldn't be hard for
yes,
you. And this idea where you should listen and you shouldn't yell at me, that's disrespectful. And so it just spirals into these really difficult interactions that could very much damage your relationship.
yeah.
And that's hard too. It's recognizing the relationship that you want to have with your child, but also how do you take care of yourself? Because if you're constantly scared, if you're constantly walking on eggshells, that doesn't work either.
Yeah. I want to name and validate that, of course, your nervous system is reacting because you're hearing the sounds, movements, seeing the movements, and perceiving what your child's body would be doing if they were in mortal danger, because that's what their brain is perceiving. And as a parent, of course, your nervous system is going to activate around that. And it's not just that they're activating their nervous system, they might be directing it at you, swearing at
Yeah,
you, calling you names, breaking your things, growling if you ask them a question. Yeah, so
physical aggression.
it's a double whammy. And then we have most of us, I think, who have PDA children, because I believe it's genetic, have on the very low end of the spectrum, at least generalized anxiety, if not all the way to our own neurodivergence or PDA profile ourselves. So it's not just, oh, everyone's nervous system activates. It's there's probably an element of your nervous system as a parent that is anxious or sensitive. And so you're in this situation where it feels like you're between a rock and a hard place, and then people are judging you and telling you you're doing it wrong, and you feel like you're failing.
Right.
So the first thing I want to do is just name that, right? And the first thing we can do as parents is become aware that's what's happening, that there's nothing wrong with us, that we're responding like this, that this is their nervous system and this is our nervous system. And neither of us are in this behavior pattern that is motivated or attention seeking or goal oriented. And we bring to the light of awareness, just first and foremost, what the heck is going on in our bodies, right? And for many parents, ultimately, this is the first pivot in their understanding of their child and their lives, where down the line they realize, oh, I'm PDA, or I'm neurodivergent, or oh, I was raised by an undiagnosed PDA or myself. So we're starting the transformation in these moments that are harrowing and grievy and feel terrible in our bodies and make you feel forsaken. And I have felt that. I've laid on the ground with my eyes pouring tears, listening to a guided meditation about feeling forsaken. Like I felt forsaken by the world, right? But if we can start to bring some self-compassion, and one of the first tools or skills we can work on, and this comes from the spirituality I was talking about, of just, can we take a sacred pause? Can we take maybe it's hard for us to pause for 1 second. And maybe what we're working on is just extending it to 3 seconds before we do anything. That's it. Or just my goal for this week is normally I start screaming or throw something or want to kill my child, which you don't do, but like you feel like it. And instead of doing that, I'm just going to pause. And my goal for this week is to get to 5 seconds instead of 0. Right? That's the progress. It's not, oh, I woke up tomorrow and now I feel peaceful. It's, okay, now we have that pause. Now maybe the next week we can bring our hand to our heart. Remember to do that. Okay. And then the next week we can bring a little mantra. This belongs as part of my human experience. And so we're bringing compassion to ourselves, right? Maybe the next week we're starting to actually feel some compassion for ourselves. Maybe over a couple months of practicing this skill over and over, we realize, oh, it's really hard for me to control my nervous system as a human. And we have a little like granular seed of compassion for what our child is going through, right? This is a long-term practice. It's a paradigm shift. That's why I call that, my signature program is called the paradigm shift, because you're completely reformulating how you view human behavior and yourself in order to provide that to your child, because that's ultimately what it requires.
It does. And like you said, that shift from my child is bad, I am a bad parent.
Yeah.
We both have nervous systems, and to understand them in a different way and what they need. We don't have to beat ourselves down anymore. That self awareness and understanding that it is one step in front of the other. And if you take a step back, that makes you human. So,
Yeah.
what can we do to that next time to make that step forward instead? That self compassion, understanding the way your body's reacting, how they might be feeling as a person who feels completely overwhelmed and threatened and doesn't have the long life experience us adults do. And it's a very different way of living and viewing the world and yourself.
Yeah, I was trained as a political scientist who viewed human behavior through econometric models that were all rational and that were all maximizing our utility. And I studied game theory, where a lot of the things, the assumptions and premises of these models, I think about my son's behavior and I'm like, and my own. And I'm like, none of this makes sense, right? But like I have a doctorate in it and it's, oh, this isn't the right lens. And that's why I like to talk about lenses, because I don't believe there's a wrong way. Like, I don't believe if you're a parent listening and what's working for your child is more exposure or more routine or more gentle consequences. This is not a judgment. It's about taking a step back. And to you, Holly, what you've kept saying, which I love, is it working? Right? And like allowing yourself to take the leap of, if it's not working, let's experiment. Let's collect some data. Let's track consistently for a couple weeks or months and see. Right? Because we might not know if it's ADHD driven or PDA driven, but if we can work consistently through a lens that we haven't already and observe the changes with their mental health, with the connection in the home, with their nervous system activation. Is it coming down? I just did this exercise on a call with parents where it was like, we measured 4 months ago what percentage of their time was in safe and social and what percentage was screaming, biting, kicking, equalizing. And there were big differences in just 4 months, right? Like 20% in safe and social, 80%, and then 4 months later, it had flipped. And other indicators we can look at, of like this one example, I was like, okay, and we would go through each one, like sleep. How is sleep? Has it changed? Let's put a data point around the low point 4 months ago, burnout. Oh, my child was needed to pace for 30 minutes before, and then there was another 30 minutes of sleep refusal. And now 4 months later, no pacing and 10 minutes of refusal. right? So we can actually look at the data that matters rather than what we're used to measuring, which is like how fast my kid's reading, or are they polite when someone walks into the room, or do they make eye contact on command? And really see our progress of, okay, this is working. It doesn't look like a neurotypical kid. My kid's still having a bunch of meltdowns, but they're a lot less than they were 4 months ago because they feel safe in their bodies, right?
It's so true. It's not about everything being perfect. It is a
Oh,
process and their skills. And when we are more self-aware, that actually helps them be more self-aware, which is lovely. And then,
yeah.
like you said, those changes. No, it's not perfect. Nothing is, and no one is. But maybe the sleeping is better and the eating is better, and maybe the meltdowns have decreased. So, where can our watchers and listeners learn more about you and your services? Because I know you have classes and you have coaching.
Yeah. Currently, I'm taking a pause from coaching just for because my mom is sick. So
Sorry.
I'm focused more on my signature program, but we do have two coaches, one of whom is a specialist in tweens and teens, PDA tweens and teens, and complex presentations. So it might be like PDA and pandas or PDA and Down syndrome. And then another PDA autistic adult with 4 PDA kids who also coaches. And they're lovely and I love working with them. And then I have a lot of what I consider to be low cost master classes, but I know that if you're like in India or Chile listening, $25 might feel like a lot. So lower cost master classes where you can try out or hone in on a particular topic, right? Like school or boundaries or burnout. And then I have one live program that I run 3 times a year, which is the Paradigm Shift program. And the next one is coming up. Enrollment starts April 15th, and I have a wait list for that. But sorry, I forgot to mention the first place I would say to start for parents is on my Instagram or Facebook, which is at Peace Parents, or YouTube, or my own podcast at Peace Parents. And then we have a free 70-minute masterclass with 6 downloadable PDFs that you can use. One is like prepping for autism evaluation. One is the 5 characteristics of PDA. Anyways, that is called the Clarity Masterclass. It's in the link in my bio, or we can include it in the show notes if that's helpful
Of
for you.
course.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll make sure that all of that information is in the show notes because I know everyone's going to want to go down and get it. And thank you so much, Casey. I really appreciate your time today. And thank you for being vulnerable in your own experience.
Sure. Yeah, I'm right there with everybody. I'm just a couple years ahead, sending back a life raft.
Life rafts are always welcome. Always welcome. Thanks again. And I hope you come back on again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.
That's a wrap on today's episode. If you found this helpful, please consider hitting that like button and subscribe so you don't miss anything. And if you're thinking, oh, I know somebody who would really appreciate this episode, please send it on to them. Also, don't forget, go down to that description below because I have loaded it with free resources and information on my parent workshops and continuing education trainings for therapists. Everything you need to keep learning and growing. Thank you for being here, for caring, and for choosing neurodiversity affirming approaches. I look forward to seeing you next time on Autism ADHD TV. Take care.
All content provided is protected under applicable copyright, patent, trademark, and other proprietary rights. All content is provided for informational and educational purposes only. No content is intended to be a substitute for professional medical or psychological diagnosis, advice, or treatment. Information provided does not create an agreement for service between Holly Blanc Moses Crossvine Clinical Group, the interviewee, Holly Blanc Moses LLC, and the recipient. Consult your physician regarding the applicability of any opinions or recommendations with respect to your symptoms or medical condition or the symptoms or medical condition of your family member. Children or adults who show signs of dangerous behavior toward themselves and/or others should be placed immediately under the care of a qualified professional.